They say they're wise. You are a woman. Stupid, 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 stupid. All right, all right. Welcome to yet another show, everyone. Sorry about I've been gone for a while, and I know that I had to just take a break for a little bit, just dealing with some personal things. But I am back. So I'm back, and I missed you all. So thank you all for tuning in. I've got a great discussion for you all today, and we're going to be talking about reparations. Reparations. We're going to be talking about reparations. Okay, so this is a very great conversation. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard that reparations conversation has been going on. Okay, we get these conversations every 2 years, or every midterm or presidential election, I should say, right? We always seem to have these conversations. They come up during the election period. We are in an election year. That's why we're having these conversations. So I want to talk to you guys about reparations. We're going to have a candid, logical conversation around this. This is perhaps going to be the most insightful, logical conversation you're going to have around reparations. Okay? I'm going to cover facts. I'm going to go over things. We're going to talk about historical timeline. We're going to talk about factual things. We're not going to have emotions in this. Okay? No emotions. No emotions. What about things factually? I'm going to give you some historical references around the topic of reparations. We're going to talk about where things stand today. And what are the likelihood of reparations being paid out to the black community? Okay? And answer the questions that I've just said. Why reparations will never be paid to the black community. So we're going to talk about these. Okay? So let's go ahead and start this. Let's talk about what is reparation. What is it? Okay? So simply put, reparation is just money paid to a particular people for injustice or for a wrongful act that was committed to a people by a government entity. That's basically what it is. So that's reparation. Now, black folks believe that there are due reparations. Okay? Now, most Americans are opposed to reparations. According to the Associated Press, 74% of black people support reparations. No surprise there. While 85% of white people oppose it. And 56% of Hispanics oppose it. Okay? And I'm sure if they polled immigrants, you may likely get higher numbers on that too. So most Americans are opposed to reparations. Okay? So why do black people want reparations? Why are they asking for this money? Okay, what is it? What is the historical connection here? It goes all the way back to slavery. It goes back to the events that occurred around 40 acres and a mule. Okay, so I'm going to give you the history behind that. So let's go and talk about that. The year is 1865. And slavery had just ended here in the United States. The North had conquered the South, and they've just abolished slavery. Now, a particular general, a Union general called William T. Sherman, met with some black leaders back then. These were newly freed people. And sat with them and said, hey, what would you like the U.S. government to do for you all now that you are free? Okay? So he met with them a series of days they met. And to his surprise, at least according to some of the accounts, they said, we want land. Okay. General Sherman was very shocked at this because for the first time, he realized how smart the African people were. Say, we want land. We want land to till, to harvest crops, to farm on, to be able to produce things so we can feed our family and build for ourselves. Okay? So that was what occurred. And right after that meeting, shortly after that meeting, he drafted out what we call today Special Field Order 15. Okay? Which is basically a document that highlighted confiscated lands to be given to the newly freed slaves. Okay, so that was what he drafted out after that meeting. Now, these particulars, the Special Field Order 15 was supported by radical Republicans. It was opposed by Democrats, right? So the radical Republicans were the ones that advocated for the abolishment of slavery. Okay. And so that's how that whole thing occurred. Now, right after that order was drafted out, this was around the same period where President Lincoln had just been assassinated and Andrew Johnson becomes the president of the United States. And so once this made it to his desk, the Special Order 15, he vetoes it. Now, here's what you're going to get from a lot of people who oppose reparations. They say that General Sherman did not have the right to give out those land, those Confederate lands, was not his to give away. Okay? This was the argument that was made back then and are still viewpoints that are held by a lot of people today. That it wasn't his to give away. That it was illegal for him to do that. Now, I don't know. That's one argument. Now, he could have done this because those were spoils of war. Who knows? I don't know. But that was the argument. And now, could that be the reason why President Johnson vetoed it? Don't know either. Could that have been logical? Or could it have been because of racism? Because, racism was really heavy back then. Okay? It was really heavy and high. So no one knows. Okay? But the argument is it was not Sherman's to give away. Right? Confiscated land was not his to give away. Now, here's the example they point to when they make that our argument. Some of you, I don't know if you've heard this before. This might be new, so pay attention. They equate that to if you own a home today, okay, and you had servants working for you, and you probably didn't treat the servants right. You weren't the nicest boss or person, and you died. Your house is all paid off for. Would you like your house to be given to your servants? Would you? How many of you today would like that? Would you agree to that? Right? So think about that for a second. So this is equivalent to that situation, right? Is just because you don't like the person, you didn't like the person that owned the home and they died, okay, doesn't give anyone the right to give their home away to strangers. Okay? In this country, there are laws behind how we govern the distribution of property when there's a deceased person involved. When the person that owns it is deceased, there are ways that is taken care of. Okay, certainly they don't give that to strangers. So that is the argument. And so, could that have been the reason why he vetoed it? I don't know. No one will know for certain. But the facts are that Special Order 15, Special Field Order 15, was vetoed by the President of the United States, President Andrew Johnson, back in 1865. Now, that's where that whole thing died off. Here is where my opinion on this. I do agree that based on the argument, right? Based on the argument and the example given, I do agree that General Sherman should have not given confiscated land or Confederate lands to slaves. Now, are slaves deserving of land? Absolutely. Okay? Absolutely. They could have certainly parsed out other areas of unclaimed lands and given it to slaves, to the newly freed slaves, to the Africans that were in here, that were just newly freed. They could have given them a bunch of other areas, acres of areas that were not claimed as property, restitution, to say, hey, they were deserving of that. Okay? Because when you start giving lands that's owned by someone else, General Sherman had to have known that it was going to be contested. He had to have known that. Now, did he know? Did he not know? I don't know. But these are the type of things that get contested. And so I tend to agree that based on that argument, you do not give away, whether you like the person or you didn't like the person, whether you hated the Confederates and all of that. Okay? Either way, their land was not anyone's to give out to anyone. Okay? Now, there could be other side of the argument and say these are spoils of war. They lost the war, and whatever we do with properties of war is our business, right? And that is a fair argument. That is a fair argument. Okay? So here's another fact that is also something to consider. Okay? The fact that if we were to use the other argument that says that, hey, these are spoils of war, you lost the war, it's ours to do what we want to do with it, great, right? The President of the United States at the time vetoed the bill, and that is a fact. Okay, in this country, the way laws get passed is that it gets written in the House. Okay, the House writes the law. It goes to the Senate to be confirmed, and then it makes its way to the President's desk for signature. That's how laws are written in this country. So at any point in that whole process, a bill can die or be killed at any point in that process. It can be written in the House and die in the Senate because Senate did not approve it or pass it. It can go through the House, go through the Senate, and get to the President's desk, and the President vetoes it. Okay, that's how it's been the practice. It's been law. It's a process in this country since 1776. Okay? And so with the reparations and with the whole Special Order 15, black folks point to the fact that that was a promise made to them. Okay. I would argue that that was not a promise. Okay. There was a proposal for that obviously got vetoed by the United States President. Now we can argue why he vetoed it and all of that. That's a different conversation, right? But that is the point, is that there wasn't a standing law based on facts as we know it. Was vetoed, and that was where that whole thing died. I think it's a sad situation that the United States government back then did not do the right thing by giving away lands that are unclaimed to newly freed slaves. Okay, so that was a missed opportunity, and that's something that obviously we can't go back and rewrite or fix history. Now, black folks are claiming the equivalent value of those lands to what they are worth today, and they're asking for a payout, like a check. Okay, the amount that we're hearing that's being thrown around is upwards. There's almost $400,000 to each person, each black person. Now let's get to the real meat of this. Not everyone is qualified for reparations check. Not everyone. So we're going to talk about those who are eligible for reparations. We're going to talk about who they are. They call themselves the American descendants of slaves, ADOS. And they also identify themselves as FBA. Okay, these are groups now. Okay, these are not anything recognized by the U.S. government. Okay, the U.S. government doesn't recognize these groups, ADOS or FBA. These are just individual entity that are created. But these ones are the ones vocal about who should get the check. So they said these checks should only be written out to American descendants of slaves. Okay. Now let's talk about why most Americans oppose reparations. Okay, most Americans oppose it, as I mentioned earlier on. Okay, most oppose it. Here's why most Americans, white people, here's why they oppose reparations. The idea that a people who were never slaves should be paid money by a people who never enslaved them is a moral argument. It's a moral deficiency. Doesn't compute. Okay? Black people today, no black person today alive, right, was ever a slave. And so the question now becomes, from white people, why do we have to pay money to a people that were never slaves and we never owned any slave? Okay? So here's what that is equivalent to. You know me and my equivalencies. What that is equivalent to would be if your father, let's just say, your father, your mother, or your uncle, whoever, someone close to you, borrowed money from another person, which he or she did not pay back before their passing. Okay, before they passed away. Now imagine that person now coming to you and say, hey, your father or your mother borrowed money from me, didn't pay it, unfortunately they passed on, I need you to pay that money back to me. What are you going to say? Are you going to pay it? It's a question. Are you going to pay it? Is it right for you to pay it? Okay. Now, if you say, no, you're not going to pay it, that's the argument. Okay. That's the argument. Now, black folks will also say, they'll counter that argument by saying, because I've heard all the argument, right? The counter argument on that is that white folks are beneficiaries of systemic injustice that were put in place in this country. White folks benefit from that. So why can't black folks also in turn be compensated for these? Okay. So that is the argument. Now, the counter argument to the counter argument, right? I'm telling you what I've heard people say. I've heard these. I've been in meetings where I've talked to both sides, right? We're not talking about people on the internet now that just spew a bunch of garbage. We're talking about logical people, okay? So the argument now will become, hold on a second. If we are to hold white people, hold them at the helm and say, hey, you didn't right the wrong of your past sins, right? You need to right the wrong, rightfully so. White folks say, again, this is the argument, right? We've done this, right? And they cite things like the Civil Rights Act that was passed in this country, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, okay? That prevents any discrimination, or at least says you can't discriminate against anyone on the basis of race, sexual orientation, religion, gender, And then we have the Voting Rights Act that was given to black folks in 1965. It was passed in 1965, allowed black to be able to vote in this country, okay, without discrimination. And then we have the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And then we have the Fair Lending Act of 1968. So the Fair Housing Act it says black folks cannot be discriminated against from owning homes in this country. And then the Fair Lending Act means that black folks cannot be discriminated against from borrowing money, okay? And on top of it, we have also affirmative action, which says that black folks cannot be discriminated against from getting a job in this country. Not to mention also, diversity and inclusion. You have the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. I think that's what that is, SNAP. Okay, where most black folks and minorities get food stamps. Okay, so you have all these programs that have been given to black communities as a way for the country to pull these people out of poverty. Okay, that is the argument. Okay, these programs were put in place, and many black folks have benefited and have been pulled out of poverty based on this program. Now, I remember when I was in school, okay, and the scholarship program, which is part of that whole, the scholarship programs too. Most times when I would see a lot of scholarship, there were many scholarship programs that were only exclusively for blacks. Okay, so if you were a white, Hispanic, Asian, you didn't get this money. They were exclusively for blacks. I don't remember seeing any scholarship program that were exclusively only white or Asian or any other entity. Okay, so you'll find those kind of programs. So even when you talk about affirmative action, okay, you find these types of things that were provisions that were given to black people, again, to help pull black people out of poverty or to give them more opportunities. Okay, so that is the argument. Now, depending on where you stand, which part of the aisle you stand in, you're obviously going to take one over the other. You're just going to stand on your own truth. Okay. So let's talk about the eligibility factor of reparations. Who gets this money? Let's talk about the black folks now. Who gets this money? Who is eligible for a payout? A payout, money, $300,000 or $400,000. Who are the descendants of slaves? Okay. Now, here's what they say. Descendants of slaves are those who can claim their lineage back to slavery. Now, okay, so that means if you were born in this country, let me step back for a second. If you migrated into this country and you're black, you're not a descendant of slaves based off of these criteria. Okay? If you're born in this country to immigrant parents, you're not ADOS. You're not a descendant of slaves. These groups tell you you're not ADOS, so you don't qualify. Okay? If you're born in this country and your parents were born in this country, but your grandparents were immigrants from any part of the globe, whether they were Caribbeans or they were African, you don't qualify for this money. Okay? That's so you're out of there. So President Barack Obama would not qualify for reparations. The President of the United States, former President of the United States, his children will not qualify for reparations because President Obama's father was from Kenya. So he doesn't qualify, right? According to this structure by these ADOS and FBA individuals. Kamala Harris, the Vice President Kamala Harris, does not qualify for reparations. And they'll tell you that. Okay? She's half Indian, half Jamaican. It's not going to work. She doesn't qualify. She doesn't get it. Based off of these criteria, right? Let me tell you who else doesn't qualify. Marcus Garvey's kids. They're Pan-Africans. They don't qualify. Yeah? They don't qualify because Marcus Garvey was from Jamaica. So if you have any ties to immigrant background in your family tree, you do not qualify for reparations. Okay, so that narrows the pool now. So you get that. So you got all of that. So now who qualifies for reparations? Okay. Now the more important question is, how can we prove that the ones that say they are really are? How can we prove that? Because there are no historical documents or documentation that we can go to, not even in the National Archive, right? That we can go to and we can say, hey, person A and person B are linked to this person that was a slave in the United States. There are no historical, there are no archives. There are none. Okay? There are none. As a matter of fact, during the census would be the closest thing that we have to that, right? The census, the U.S. Census would be the closest thing that we have to that. And there are not even any that can link anyone today to a person because slaves were not counted during the census. Okay, the U.S. Census that were held after this country was founded in 1776 all the way through, in the 1800s. As a matter of fact, the two particular ones that we will need to look into would be the 1850 census and the 1860 census. These two censuses, okay, you wouldn't find any slaves counted in those because they weren't counting slaves in the census period. Slaves were not counted. Okay, these are documentation. They didn't count slaves. So if you look at that, those that were counted and those that were listed in the archives for those census in the census during that period in time, in 1850 and 1860, if your parents were not listed in that, they were probably slaves, right? Because they weren't counted. The first time we saw black people counted historically in any census was in 1870. Okay, so that makes sense, right? Because slavery ended in 1865, so the next census was in 1870. So that was the first time that black people were counted in the U.S. Census. Now the question now becomes, if we cannot trace back anyone to a particular slave, because it is impossible. It is impossible to be able to trace anyone back, right, to a person in slavery. So how do we know that you are a descendant of a slave? Because you said so? Okay, because if we have to go based off the criteria, if the U.S. government, okay, uses this exclusion criteria, they will somehow have to ask for evidence, and you have to produce evidence that you are indeed a descendant of slave to be able to get payout. So how do you prove that? What documentation do you have on record that says that you were connected to a particular slave in your family tree? Okay? It is impossible. There's none. You can't. Okay? Here's another thing that you cannot disprove and you cannot prove. How can you prove that people that are from other countries are not supposedly descendants of slaves? For example, people from Haiti. Historically, we know in history that a lot of slaves that were stubborn were shipped. The unruly slaves were shipped to Haiti, okay, to the plantation. They were shipped over to Haiti from this country. So the descendants of those slaves, are they not ADOS according to the definition of ADOS? Are they not descendants of slaves? Okay, so what about the ones to Jamaica? Because slaves are also shipped to Jamaica from this country to the plantation over there. Are those also not so-called ADOS? They are. Okay, let me give you another one. What about Liberia? Right? What about Liberia? Okay, African Americans that founded the country, Liberia. Are those not ADOS? Are their descendants not also entitled to reparations if this gets paid out? What about when slaves were freed in this country, okay, during the Jim Crow era? Can you prove that none of these slaves left the United States and said, hey, now we're 18, this is 1870, 1880. I don't want to stay in this country anymore, because of the trauma that they've experienced. Can you prove that didn't happen, that they left the United States and went back to the country of origin? Can you prove that didn't happen? Because these things did happen. Are those people not ADOS? Okay, who are today from those countries that you claim, and ADOS are saying, if you migrate from these countries, you are not ADOS. How can you prove that? You can't, any more than you can prove that you are a descendant of slaves. Okay, so that is a huge problem. Okay, that is a huge problem. It is impossible to prove or not to prove. That is a huge problem. So this is why reparations has never been paid out, because the criteria is set. This exclusion thing is that which is impossible to prove. So what these people tell you, and when I mean people, I'm talking about the founders of these groups, which again, these groups have no ties. The U.S. government does not recognize these groups. Okay, so these are just internet people on the internet. because the HR 40 bill that is being pushed around, all of that, doesn't have any of this Exclusion Act in it. Doesn't have none of that. Okay? So these are just people on the internet talking, right? But the criteria is set by these groups, right? In terms of, you know what they say? They said the U.S. government, the burden of proof needs to be on the U.S. government. That the U.S. government needs to go figure it out. That's what they said. That's because you're not going to find one of them giving you a logical explanation how you can prove or not prove that someone is ADOS. Because the fact of the matter is, none of the individuals online can prove that they are. Because apparently, if you're born in this country, that does not make you an ADOS. But to a lot of these people, they use that as a claim. Because I was born in this country. My father was born in this country. Really? Okay. What about the other ones that were born in this country that you seem to exclude? Because they have immigrant family. What about your parents? Right? So that is the argument. This is why it is the most divisive conversation in the United States. The whole conversation around reparations. Now, black folks will also tell you that reparations, the reason why they're asking for reparations is because reparations been paid to all these other groups. So they'll cite the Japanese Americans. Yes, reparations were paid to Japanese Americans who were wrongfully incarcerated during World War II in internment camps. President Reagan paid out this reparations to Japanese, and you can kind of see why that is, right? And again, when they paid that out, there wasn't any Exclusion Act behind that. Okay, and also they'll cite reparations paid to Native Americans, and they'll cite reparations paid. So they have been reparations that have been paid to groups, rightfully so, right? The groups that were captured, that were held hostage in Iran during the Jimmy Carter administration, right? Those individuals were paid reparation for their pains and suffering. So black folks will use that. But again, there wasn't an exclusion in that whole thing, right? So that's the argument, okay? Now, we've just talked about the eligibility factor around reparations. Now, why are black folks asking for this money? They say it'll help to shrink the wealth gap. That the reason why black folks aren't succeeding economically is because they were denied 40 acres and a mule. Okay, so that's what they say, is that's the reason. If they give this money to us, we will become whole, right? I don't buy the argument. Okay, the idea that somehow black folks weren't able to create generational wealth because they were denied the land. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I buy it. Okay, there's no way for us to know that if black folks if the slaves, the newly freed slaves were given land, whether confiscated land or on claimed lands, if that would help, or that would have somehow had a huge impact. I think it would, but again, I don't know that. None of us know that for a fact. We can't. Okay, because I can cite you countless cases where black folks have sold things out. They've sold companies that were owned to them. They sold it off. They didn't pass it on. I can also cite you countless situations here in the United States where in the present states of black folks, there are millionaires, they're black millionaires, almost a million number of black millionaires that exist today under the present condition, without the land, without all of that. Okay? These are people you find in Atlanta, in Houston, in Dallas. I'm not talking about athletes now. We're not talking about athletes. We're not talking about celebrities. We're talking about everyday people, black people, who found a business, a niche market, in cosmetics, real estate developers. These people made something of themselves and have become millionaires today. These are people that exist in our timeline. They did it without 40 acres and a mule. So the notion that somehow black folks have not progressed because they were denied land, I don't buy the argument. I don't. Okay? Also the argument that 40 acres and a mule denied black folks generational wealth. I don't know if I buy that either. Okay, because I will tell you that a lot of the programs that were put in place, the ones that I mentioned earlier ones, were put in place to help black folks develop generational wealth. Right? The Fair Housing Act, to be able to buy a home. You can pass that today to your family. You could. Right? The Fair Lending Act, I mean, everyone is under the same process. You get a good credit, you have a great job, you can buy a house, you can buy land, you can pass that on today. Okay? So I don't buy that because of that, black folks have not been able to earn. Now, are there systemic unjust practices that black folks face every day? The answer is absolutely true. I face them too. So there are unjust practices that are going on every day. Yes, it happens. The world is not perfect. However, there are a lot of black people, millions of black people, that have somehow found ways. They're living everyday testimonies. They found ways to elevate themselves and their children and their family, and they've built a life for themselves under the same structure that we currently have today. So how do we reconcile that? How do you make the argument for that and not for that? That's why I can't. Logically, I can't get there. Right? I can't get there. So, but you'll find the Yvette Carnells, the Antonio Moore or Anthony Moore. You'll find the Tariq Nasheed. You'll find the Dr. William Darity, he's an economist. You find these people that are on the internet, selling out false messaging to the black community about reparations. So here's why reparations will not be paid and will never be paid to black people. So I said all of that. I wanted to give you guys some historical context. I wanted to give you some historical facts and figures as to how we got here, define for you what reparation is, also tell you where Americans stand on reparations, white, black, Hispanic, where most Americans stand on that, and also the reasons behind reparations. So that's why I took you all around that to give you that information. So that is all to bring you here. Why I believe reparation, the single most reason why reparations will never be paid to black Americans under the structure. You ready? Here's why. It violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Okay? The Civil Rights Act of 1964 says you cannot discriminate against on the basis of race, sexual orientation, religion, gender. You cannot. You cannot discriminate against anyone on those bases. And the structure of reparations, as these groups have laid them out, clearly violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, here's what's ironic about that. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was something that black folks fought for. They fought for Martin Luther King, bless his heart, the civil rights leaders. Black folks fought for this because they said back then they were being discriminated against on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, all of that. And they fought hard to be included, to not be discriminated against, all of that. So now guess what's going on? The same people who fought against discrimination are now in turn discriminating against other people. I want you to think about that for a second. Okay? Hate is what hate created. The same people who, for years, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the single most important thing, an achievement, milestone achievement that black folks achieved in this country. Now they're trying to discriminate against people and violate that based off of the reparations conversation. And here's the caveat on that. The U.S. government is not going to violate a law to appease a people. It's not going to do it. Because that is a clear lawsuit. The U.S. government will be sued. And they would lose. If the U.S. government passes a reparations program or a reparations bill with monetary gift or monetary value to a people, and exclude other people, that is a clear violation of the Civil Rights Act. It's not going to happen. Because that's a lawsuit, not to mention a huge divide in this country, to split this country right down the middle. So that is why reparations will never be paid out. Okay? So if they're going to pay money out, they're going to have to pay it out to everyone. To every black person. Now, it's not going to make all these so-called ADOS people happy because they think they are entitled to that money, other people are not. Again, we can't prove that you are, but, right? So our elected officials, that's why we elected them. Okay, that's why we put them in there. They're there to uphold the law, to uphold the Constitution, right? So they're not going to pass a bill that clearly discriminates against a group of people. It's not. I mean, ask any constitutional lawyer. There's no one, right? Not to mention also the other murky part where somehow people that were never slaves should be paid money by people that never enslaved them. So that's all into it. But even if you were to get through that argument and you justify the whole thing, at the end of the day, you cannot break the law. You can't. Okay? It'll go all the way to the Supreme Court, and the U.S. government will lose it because immigrant groups can all come together. And when I mean immigrant groups, I'm not just talking about black immigrants. I'm talking about all immigrant groups who have black kids, black children who are connected, who have sons, daughters, who are themselves part and were, connected to this whole thing. They're going to sue the U.S. government. And they'll win. And the payout off of that will be much more than whatever it is that's paid out to the so-called descendants of slaves. Okay? So that's why reparations will never be paid out. Okay? Okay. So I want you to ask these people. I mean, this is conversation, you just got to be logical about it. Right? Take away your emotions. Take away all of that. Look at things factual. Because when you're talking about taxes, money paid by the U.S. government, because that way that money comes, they're not going to print that out of thin air. And you find black folks on the internet say, oh, they're printing the money out for the COVID relief fund and all of that. Yeah, okay, great. Right? Now, the reason why they did that is because most Americans agreed that we need to do something about this situation. It was a bipartisan agreement. Reparations doesn't have a bipartisan support. Most Americans oppose it. So how's that going to work? Right? Because you have the voices like Tariq Nasheed and all of that. They keep championing this whole segregation and disunity and all of that stuff. So great. That's what they keep championing. On that basis alone, you're not going to get the money paid out to you. Which is why you find the whole HR 40, which is currently something that they're dangling right now as a carrot. And they do this every time with black people. I don't know what it is about our peoples, man. We're the only ones that these things can happen to. Okay? So HR 40 is a bill that was proposed in 1989. This is 2022. It's not going to go anywhere. Okay? But they would do this to black folks, and black folks every election here get excited about the prospect of reparation to be paid out. But it's never going to be. Here's what I think is going to happen with reparations. And I don't think it's going to be a reparation. It's just going to be another program. Not going to be a reparation in terms of cash and checks and all of that. That's not going to happen on these things, on the basis of this, what I've just talked about, that it violates the Civil Rights Acts. Same thing that you fought for. Right? The same thing you were like, oh man, they can't discriminate against me on the basis of my color. But you're doing that. You're doing the same thing to other people now. You're doing that to immigrants from Africa, immigrants from the Caribbean, those whom you cannot prove that they are not connected to slavery. You can't. Any more than you can prove that you are. So So they do this every year and they dangle this carrot. And why do they do that? Because they're trying to get black folks excited that something will finally be done so you can get your vote. Okay? That's the only reason why. Nothing. They're not going to do it. Even while you have a Democrat president, even when you have majority Democrats in the House, and then you also have the Democrats, mostly in the Senate, you're not going to, they're not going to do it. Because again, these elected officials have constituents that they have to answer to. They have constituents that's voted, people like myself, we vote him in and vote him out. So they have to represent the people that they serve. They have to represent us. And the majority of people are saying no to this. Okay. Now, everyone has their reasons why they're saying no to it. Like as I mentioned, with white people, they don't feel that that's morally right for them to pay reparations to people that were never a slave and they never owned any slave. And most of them probably didn't agree with slavery, condemned it as equally as you condemn it, right? So now the idea that they have to pay that to you is morally unjust. Okay, so that's that argument. And then you have the other ones from the immigrant group. You're going to exclude immigrants, right, who go through the pain and suffering in this country equally as you do. There are no sufferings that any black person that's claiming lineage to slavery go through that somehow an immigrant person from another part of the world that migrated here did not go through. This whole idea of the American struggle, we're all in it together. So it's not going to, it's a DOA, dead on arrival. It's not going to happen. Okay. So if they're going to set up another program, just like the ones that we have, and these programs that are currently around today, whether it's the SNAP program or the affirmative action program or, Fair Housing Act program or the Fair Lending Act program, these programs don't exclude anyone. So anyone, whether you are an immigrant, you are entitled. The only criteria is you have to be a citizen of the United States. Rightfully so. You can't be an illegal person. You can't be someone that's illegally in this country. You have to be a U.S. citizen. So they don't care about you were born in this country or you migrated in this country. They don't care. As long as you're a United States citizen, you're an American. Okay? And you're entitled to this program. That's it. And I know that upsets these so-called ADOS people because they somehow think that they are so rightful. They're the only rightful people for this thing. Come on, man. Okay? So that is the argument. That is not going to jive. So I think this is just going to morph into another program, which is just going to be like the other programs that we have. Right? That doesn't exclude anyone and everyone is entitled to it. As long as you're a U.S. citizen and you meet those criteria, you're entitled to this program. This whole notion about being discriminated against, and it's so ironic that black people, the same ones that cry about racism, are now the ones being racist to other black people. Yeah, the hate that hate created. The hate that hate created. Can you imagine that? The civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King and all of them, will be rolling in their graves because that's not what they fought for. They didn't fight for that. That's not what that's not what the march and all that whole years of fighting was for. It wasn't for black folks to be fighting against other black folks. But it's sad, right? But this isn't all black people, by the way, okay? I would even argue this isn't even majority of black people. This is just a bunch of idiots on the internet, okay? And who somehow feel that they're entitled. Again, the victim and entitlement mindset. Okay. And it's usually when you get to a particular place in your life when you feel like you're not getting ahead in life, you resort to attacking other people. But it's not going to get you what you're looking for. You're not going to get the U.S. government to cut you a check. At best, you're going to be like a 501c status where someone donates to you. That's it. That's the only, and I think these groups, that's what they're looking for, which is why they've registered themselves as 501c status, so they can collect donation. That's about it. And I don't know if any company would donate to that. Right now, of course, they're hoping to hit it big, just like the Black Lives Matter hit it big with after the death of George Floyd. And we see all the donations from very kind companies who were just like, that was a wrongful act, all of that, and which it was. The way, he died, it was wrong on all levels. And so people were very, very drawn to that emotionally, and they donated to that organization, which we see today just lavished the money and spent the money and didn't do nothing for the community. So these groups are hoping for the same luck, right? But I think that most companies, because of what they've seen with the Black Lives Matter organization, and they've seen with how that money and the misuse of those money, aren't going to fall for that the second time. So good luck. They're not going to do it. Not on these bases. Okay, not on these bases. Right. So that's about the only thing that can happen is you get donations. But in terms of the U.S. government writing out or passing a law that violates the Civil Rights Act just to appease a small pocket of people, it's not going to happen in this country. It's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. Right? Laws are made for everyone. Provisions are made for everyone. Okay. Sad that we're seeing black people discriminate against other black people. It's just sad. It's just the saddest thing that we're seeing. So thank God for, reasonable, law-abiding citizens and lawmakers. They're not just going to listen to these people. These are just internet trolls. Okay. So understand that the whole ADOS and the FBA are not recognized by the U.S. government. The U.S. government doesn't recognize any of these groups. These are all internet entities. They're not recognized by the U.S. government. You can go ahead and call yourself that all day, all you want. Okay, if it makes you feel better, great. Can't prove that you are, but sure, right? Okay, so that is my video today, and that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about. In my next video coming up, I'm going to talk to you more about, and I'm going to go in depth into these individuals that are championing this whole reparations. People like the Tariq Nasheeds, the Yvette Carnell, the Anthony Moore. Okay, I will tell you that these individuals know there is no way that this money will be paid. They know that. Okay, these are just people who are taking advantage of their own people, taking advantage of the black community, like many have. Okay, these groups are not new. We've been seeing these groups over the years. There used to be one that they called themselves, what did they call? The Hebrew Israelites. You remember those ones? Where are they now? They've crawled back into their hole. I remember a few years back, they were dominating the internet. These were also those that were anti-Africans. Black people, right? Black groups. Anti-Africans. I remember when I lived in New York, I would see them on the road. You just such vitriol against everyone. They hated whites. They hated everyone. Africans, whites, Hispanics, everyone. They were anti-Semitic. They hated Jews. They hated everyone. These people hated everyone. Same thing with the FBA people. It's funny. It's always the same script, different cast. Okay? And they somehow rally, because again, black folks, they yell loud enough, they will get few people to pay them attention. Where are they now? Nowhere. They've crawled back into their hole. No one is paying them attention. They've crawled back. Okay? They come out and they leave behind wreckage. Such wreckage when they leave. And they destroy more of their own people than they actually repair. So here we go with another one. We have the ADOS and the FBA, which are the same sentiment. Anti-Americans. They hate Africans, they hate whites, they hate Italian whites, they hate Jews, they hate Asians. You know, these are the ones that when we are watching the news and we see Asians being attacked by black people, these are the ones that are doing it.
An Asian American viciously beaten on a New York City subway. NYPD officials say they're still investigating whether it's a hate crime. A warning now, the video we're about to show is graphic and disturbing. Local coverage from NBC4 New York and reporter Erica Byfield.
The J-train beating is brutal. Fists flew both ways until they didn't. Eventually, an Asian man passes out after getting punched, choked.
It makes you think twice about taking the train.
The NYPD's Hate Crimes Task Force is reviewing it, working to learn when this happened, what prompted it, and who this man is. Last seen walking off the train in Brooklyn at the Kosciuszko Street station.
Bystander intervention trainings.
It was several miles away in Bensonhurst where that came up. Lawmakers, community activists on hand to support two women who believe that attackers spit on them because they're Asian.
He just spit out to me and then fall on my face here. And I said, excuse me. Then I didn't look back.
He didn't attack anyone who could have fought back, and I believe there was a reason for that.
16-year-old Vanessa Lamb says that mid-March day, she also got pushed. A witness saw and helped.
If we don't speak up, people will be emboldened to do these senseless acts.
We need good neighbors like that.
Monday, several lawmakers committed to find funding for that, convinced that's part of the way that New York City must tackle this issue, especially given what happened on that J train.
These guys, such anger, such hate, and such vitriol, these are the ones doing this. Attacking Asian Americans because they're immigrants. These are the ones doing that. And so it's sad, yeah. It's a sad situation, but I can go on and on about that, and I just wanted to give you some historical reference behind this, okay, behind the conversation on reparations. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment, share the content, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Men du är fett och vanlig. Och det jag lägger är min tid. Jag vill ha dig, du får mig känna safety. Jag kan nog leda baby. Och jag kommer aldrig ändra mig. Aldrig, aldrig, aldrig. Kommer aldrig känna så här för någon annan än